you've made it pretty clear that it's for our your coaching and your Christian faith to walk alongside each other. Do you have
Sure.
any more to add about that, or?
Yeah, I think um, so. It's easy for me. I don't want to say what's easy for me is easy for everybody. God's wired me as a shepherd. I love people. I love being around people. I also really enjoy sports. I think they are important. But I think one of the reasons why I feel like they're pretty harmonious for me is that we want to, as a church and as followers of Jesus, we want to be engaged with the community that's around us. And we have in Camarillo this year, just in pony baseball, I think we had 1,200 kids signed up to play baseball this year.
Wow.
Uh, this is a place where our community is going, our community is gathering. So often the church tends to say, hey, community, come here. Hey,
Mm.
community, come to where I am. Hey, community, come here. We're not going to go to you, but we'll invite you to come to us all the time. And I think it's incredibly important that the church uh, doesn't just take an invitational posture, but takes a sacrificial posture in moving toward uh, the city and the community in which we live. And so for me, it's a fantastic opportunity to move outward. And having done this for quite some time now, we've also cultivated a relationship. There's now more than three families that are a part of our church that I think came as a result of coaching. And so much so that right now I'm coaching an all-star team, and four of the kids are in our students. And, it's a really neat thing. And as we've engaged faithfully over the years, it's created opportunity for people to trust us, for people to be excited to be on our team, for also new relationships to be cultivated. And so for me, it's not a challenge for this to be harmonious with our Christian faith. It actually feels, and our elder team is supportive of this. They've actually said, hey, we want you to almost consider this as part of your job. Like this is part of you being a missionary to our community. And that has been such a blessing, because the church, like I mentioned before, the church needs to engage with our community. And sometimes it's really difficult to figure out where are those watering holes. I
Mm.
think of the woman at the well regularly, and it's one of my favorite stories. But in this instance, what it just reminds me of is there were common places where people regularly gathered. It didn't matter if you were a Jew or if you were male or female necessarily. There were things that needed to happen. People needed to get water.
Mhm.
Generally, it was Jewish women going together to go get water. But nevertheless, it was a place where it was a common space where people would gather. Now those common spaces are really hard to find. Where do we find the common spaces where we can be with one another? Everything is so fast paced and we move at a certain clip that it makes it hard to find common spaces where we can actually give other people value, where we can honor the Imago Dei and others. Um, and I believe sports can be an avenue for that. And I will say, in particular, baseball and probably soccer too, there's something about the outdoor nature and the slower pace nature of what's going on. Basketball is a little bit more challenging, even though I love basketball, but it's so loud in the gym and everything's moving so fast paced and you're moving people in and moving people out. It's a little bit harder for the community development, but being engaged in the sport community, especially in baseball, there's a slower pace. And not only am I able to engage with these 10 to 15 young young boys, but Keely and other families are able to engage with one another. It's not just a place for me as a coach to engage, it's a place for other families to potentially be intentional on the sidelines as
Mhm.
they're talking, engaging, learning other people's stories. Um, and so that's something that has been important for us. And we see it as part of our ministry to our community to be the light that God has called us to be in these spaces, because it's not even though I have a big affinity towards it, there's also a lot of darkness engaged in a lot of youth sports as well.
Okay, so you are very passionate about athletics, and we can hear that, and I know you are, and I totally understand and love that. And obviously you're passionate about the Lord. And
Absolutely.
so would you say you have a priority of one versus over the other?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have the invitation as followers of Jesus to declare that Jesus Christ is Lord, and not for that to just be a declaration, but it to be something that's demonstrated in our lives. And so, of course, my devotion is to the Lord. In fact, He's the reason why I engage in these coaching opportunities. And it's His love that compels me forward into these spaces. I think um, what would be challenging is if I had a theology or a worldview that had a secular versus sacred divide. If I, like, as we go to practices and as we go to games with my kids, we pray every time we're going. Hey, God, we're so grateful for this opportunity. God, you've called us to be light and salt in these places. Would you give us somebody to bless today? Um, and so we view these aspects, and we've got to be cautious because it's not always. There are plenty of times where either emotions might get the best of us, or where we might get too wrapped up in something, and that'll happen, and we have to deal with it. But this is part of our spiritual act of worship. That I'm not worshiping baseball. I'm worshiping Jesus as I engage with these amazing creatures in whom He's created and made in His image. And I'm also worshiping Jesus by delighting in being human. Uh, and so if I didn't have a worldview that saw that as part of worship, part of my discipleship unto Jesus, in a way in which to be fully human and following Jesus in this flourishing life, it would be challenging. It would be way more challenging. And I think I would maybe feel guilt. Maybe I'm not spending as much time praying as I ought, or maybe I should be putting more time into that sermon. And in the reality, I think one of the things that the Lord is teaching us is that no, he's writing sermons in the middle of the coaching experience. No, He is doing ministry. In Ephesians 4, you're equipped for the work of the ministry. Part of my ministry is coaching. And I've got an elder team that believes that as well, which is really, really helpful. But I think so often we have this secular versus sacred divide that is really unhelpful. And we think this is me time, and then this is worship time. Now, I think one of the aspects of your question, Lori, is probably also connecting to how do you handle the Sunday morning stuff? How do you
That was
handle,
my next question.
yeah, how do you handle balancing this out?
Mhm.
Because we're instructed in Hebrews not to forsake the gathering. And so I am a pastor. I'm a lead pastor. I believe that the church is called to regularly gather. And I think it's incredibly important that our Sunday gatherings have a very high priority. And so, for me personally, if I we're in a season right now where there are a lot of games on Sunday. So it's All-Star season, and during the normal regular season, there's no games on Sunday and practices or anything like that. But during All-Stars, there's a short window of time where there are some games on Sunday. Now, for me as a pastor, it's part of my job and my commitment to, of course, be at our gatherings on Sunday. And you might ask, like, well, what do you do with the boys? How does that work? And we've made the decision that if this were a regular pattern, we would not be okay with it and we wouldn't sign up for it. A short stint is different than an established pattern. And so I do not believe that it's acceptable or beneficial teaching to our children that we're trying to raise in the Lord to, on a regular basis, miss our Sunday gatherings. However, if we miss our Sunday gatherings, we up our intentionality at home. So there's a training element that happens in our teaching and instructing of our kids Because again, this comes down to making sure that we understand, for us, we are the primary disciple makers of our kids. God has called us to engage with them, and regular participation on Sunday is part of that discipleship. And if there's something that interrupts that, we make sure to make some corrections, and we're really quick to understand that for some people, habits can be broken and or new habits can start to form quickly if we don't. So there might be temptation for folks who engage in sports, and I've seen this regularly, where it starts with something like All Stars. They're like, okay, there's going to be 3 weeks this summer where, we're not going to be able to attend on Sunday. And in the grand scheme of things, especially with the way attendance is these days, that's nothing in many respects. However, 3 weeks can turn into 9 weeks or 6 weeks or 12 weeks. And then all of a sudden they've signed up for fall ball, and fall ball has a tendency to be on Sunday morning. And now we're like, well, we made the exception for All Stars, so we're going to make the exception for fall ball. And now we have 12 weeks where our kids aren't attending. And I would say to very much pay attention to that. You don't have to, your kid is not going to miss out on growing as a baseball player if you say no to these rhythms that are going to impact other rhythms that do take higher priority. And so attending and being part of the Sunday gathering for us takes priority over like a regular season, which would be anywhere from 10 to 16 weeks. That would not be something that we would be okay with. 3 weeks, different story. But I would highly encourage people to say, hey, we need to make sure that we're disciplined to get back into the gathering on a regular basis. And summer is a hard time for people in general to be regular at the gathering. But I would say it's really important, because the humans that we tend to be people who, back to kind of what we talked about earlier, we'd like to make excuses as to why maybe we're not going to make it to the gathering, whether it's a vacation or whether it's we were up late Saturday night, or getting ready to go to the beach Sunday afternoon, or we just want to go to the beach, fill in the blank. There are loads of excuses that we can make. And the reality is we need to make sure that our priorities are high, and I think we need to honor Scripture, not forsake the gathering, because of what God does in those spaces, challenging us, encouraging us, using us to equip the body. And our kids need to see that regularly. So, and then I would say if you're in a space like an all-star season, we need to understand that we're always discipling our kids, but what are we discipling them unto? Are we discipling them unto Jesus? Are we discipling them unto pony baseball, or unto, club soccer? What are we discipling them into? And you've got to understand there is no, we are either discipling them toward Jesus, or we are discipling them toward something else.
Mm-hmm. That's so good. Yeah, I am so glad I asked that question. I thought we had covered it, but we did.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that needs help. I think I mentioned it a little bit, but especially ever since COVID, regular attendance, within the United States in the church is down so much. I think the average attendee of a church goes, I think, once every 3 weeks, which once every 3 weeks doesn't sound like a rhythm to me. That's an event, and church isn't an event. And the gathered body of Jesus is not an event. It is what the people of God do. And if the people of God are not gathering on a regular basis with a committed group of people together, we are missing out on being the people that God has called us to be in the city that he's called us to be in.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. Thank you for that. I love your perspective. Really good.
Yeah.
I have a question for you.
Yeah. Fire away.
Yeah. What about our busy, hurried culture? And I was
Mm.
guilty of that with my kids. They were in piano lessons, they were in music, they were in Awana, they were in multiple activities, and they were busy all the time. And there there is talk among circles that kids being too busy is not good,
Mm.
and I agree with that. And so I even wondering if what I did was right. I don't know. So
The
you
always, yeah, that's a great
we
question.
can really second guess ourselves a lot. But do you have
All the time.
thought on, I think you do. I think you've talked about
Yeah.
spaces in our lives, but what do you think about parents and having their kids so busy? And sports is
Yeah.
one of them. But
Yeah.
how do we handle that?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And honestly, it's one that I've vacillated around a lot. Because there is a fullness to life um, that is a lot. And I don't know that I have the answer. I think it's something we have to pay attention to.
I was hoping
Um,
you would have the answer.
yeah, I know, me too. Because I go back and forth, because even though there's a hurriedness to some extent that can come with sports, there's also a discipline and a routine that comes with sports that actually is really helpful for kids, especially right now. We have, these things that are available, and most kids have them, and
Yeah,
most
and you're
kids have
holding up a phone.
iPads.
You're holding up a phone right now, and for the people in podcast land.
Yes, sorry. I was holding up a screen, whether it's one that fits in your pocket, or whether it's an iPad, or whether it's a Kindle. Um, I'll say this: I would rather people be engaged with sports than spending more time on screens.
Hmm.
Um, but I do think balance is needed. Um, I think the rhythms that God provides are important, from Sabbath to rest. We're told that God gives to his beloved rest, he gives to them sleep. Um, and we have the temptation to fill every moment. Um, so I think this is something that we need to be cautious of. I'm a fan of sports, but they can become king really quickly. And uh, sports needs to be a conduit, not a king. Um, and so we need to pay attention to that. Most likely, your kid playing on this travel ball team is not going to be the thing that makes him a Major League Baseball player or basketball player or fill in the blank. We need to be willing to say no. Uh, and so I think as parents, my encouragement with parents is you need to have active, ongoing conversation if you have a spouse or a close friend or accountability partner of what's too much. Because most likely you're not going to know until it's too late. And we need to pay attention. As a parent, especially if you have multiple kids playing sports at the same time, there's no way around it. You are going to be busy. It's going to be full. That is not a bad thing. But the question is, are the priorities that we have in life still able to be achieved? So as a family, as people of faith who are living in our community, like these are things like, am I involved in regular community with people where I'm known and loved, where we're pushing one another towards Jesus? So that could be a community group, a small group, a life group. I don't think sports should ever come above those things. Am I regularly engaged in a Sunday gathering? And again, that regular for some might look different, but I would highly like that means that regularly engaged means that we expect to see each other on Sunday. Like knowing that sometimes something is going to come up. We get that. There's tons of grace. But for people who are committed together, who gather regularly in the same community, the surprise should not be that you're present. The surprise should be that you weren't able to make it. And for many out there, the surprise is that you made it. And I think we want that to be flipped. So we need to be engaged. We need to make sure the priority of being engaged in community. Again, that can be with 3 people, 12 people, whatever, in a regular fashion, engaged in a gathering where it's expected. You're expected to be there, and you expect others to be there. And those things need to take place regularly. And then I would make sure that there is some space in your schedule for some form of rest, or else you will burn out. It will take place. And of course, the other would be that we've got it personally. You've got to have a personal engagement, regular engagement with God in His Word, that you are making sure that you are filled up. Romans 12:1 reminds us that our spiritual act of worship, our reasonable worship, is to offer ourselves as living sacrifices. And so that means that I can worship Jesus in every area of life. I can be a servant to Him in whatever I'm doing. If you have 3 kids who are in baseball, basketball, and soccer, or whatever, you can be a minister in those spaces. Absolutely. But if you're not being filled up, if you're not taking the moments to rest, to engage with God regularly and with others, you are going to burn out. And those places won't be places of worship. Those places will be places of exhaustion. That will probably be your response to those places of exhaustion. After you've been exhausted all day, you will most likely turn to escaping at night. So whether that's through drinking, Netflix, diving into the doom scroll of Instagram or TikTok or whatever, that will most likely be your response. And eventually your home life will begin to crumble. And we have to make sure that that's not what takes place in our homes.
Yeah, very good.